Freedom of the press, a bedrock of American democracy, now under pressure around the world.
They inform citizens, they hold the powerful to account. So this is all really necessary for a healthy democracy.
From Haiti to Afghanistan and Nigeria to Iran, democracy's dependence on press freedom. Now, on the inside story, A Free Press Matters.
Hi, I'm Jessica Drury, VOA's Press Freedom Editor. A free press matters because freedom to report without fear of reprisal helps the public hold governments to account. Freedom of the press is the cornerstone to American democracy, enshrined in the First Amendment of the US Constitution. But press freedom is under attack everywhere, and with it, an attack on democracy itself. Freedom House is a non-profit organization that tracks freedom and democracy around the world. Its latest report finds political and civil liberties in decline for the 17th consecutive year. Among the organization's biggest concerns, the rollback in media freedom. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias gets us started.
As freedoms continue to decline globally for the 17th consecutive year in 2022, U.S. nonprofit Freedom House noted a positive trend. Everyday citizens are demanding that their political and civil rights be preserved.
We continue to see that around the world in the most repressive environments. We see that in China, we see that in Cuba, we saw that in Iran last year.
Gorokhovska says that inadequate protections, intimidation, and even violence against journalists has left media freedom at risk in at least 157 countries and territories.
They inform citizens, they hold the powerful to account. So this is all really necessary for a healthy democracy.
She added that Russian censorship was particularly damaging when it came to reporting the war in Ukraine.
You couldn't call the war a war, you couldn't criticize the Russian military. And so as a result, most Russian independent media left the country and has to be based elsewhere.
The repression has also discouraged ordinary citizens from seeking access to reliable sources of information, even through a VPN, for instance, says Ksenia Kirilova, an investigative journalist and analyst at the Jamestown Foundation.
If you just share any truthful information about the war, you can be arrested and can be put in jail.
The Freedom in the World report, now in its 50th year, also highlighted declines in Burkina Faso and Myanmar.
We actually have seen people put to death in Myanmar for offering criticism of the coup and of the ruling military junta. We're really seeing an unfortunate situation in Burkina Faso because it means sort of almost a complete destruction of political institutions and people's rights.
She noted that's a sharp contrast to Colombia and Lesotho, which are among the 34 countries to show improvements.
One aspect of sort of the bright spots we see are elections that are competitive and free.
The United States also has work to do in terms of combating polarization, something Gorokhovska called warring.
But we also see efforts from both political parties to address that.
Amid a global struggle for democracy, Freedom House recommends governments make human rights a priority, including in bilateral engagements. Veronica Balderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Among the most dangerous places to report is Haiti. 7 journalists were killed there in 2022, and threats of violence and intimidation are escalating. From Port-au-Prince, Mathieu de Villemay shows us how journalists fight to deliver the news.
We often face death threats from people committing acts of violence.
That's Dieudonné Saint-Cyr, who reports for the Kingdom FM radio and the news website L'Éthique in Haiti. As a journalist in the capital, Port-au-Prince, he risks his life every day.
I've had experiences where I survived by the grace of God. I've had head injuries after running into a streetlight while trying to avoid being shot.
Although he has escaped serious physical harm, the trauma has taken an emotional toll. Saint-Cyr is struggling after the deaths of his friends and colleagues.
I am living in constant fear, and that has not changed. When I look around, there are 5 or 6 journalists I know who have died. You ask yourself, will it be me tomorrow? And if I'm going to die tomorrow, where will it be? How will they execute me? Will I be shot, or will they beat me to death?
Unrest and violence have ramped up since the July 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. In the apparent power vacuum, gangs have been fighting for territory. It's a situation that the United Nations says is creating a living nightmare for thousands. Since then, journalists have been navigating a treacherous environment. Some have been contacted by gang leaders who want to share details about their actions, such as the blocking of the Vareux oil terminal in Port-au-Prince in September. Gangs have also threatened journalists for quoting their rivals in the news.
The gangs understand the importance of a journalist's microphone because they want to use it to get their message out.
Residents, too, recognize the importance of the press. When 3 rival groups went to war in 2021 and 2022, media helped keep the public safe, says Yvener Fanor-Silla, a Port-au-Prince community leader.
We did interviews with journalists asking them to get the news out, make the public aware of what's going on, make the gangs aware of the impact of their actions, make people traveling through the area aware too, and that effort resulted in the peace we've been enjoying for 2 months.
As shown by the kidnapping of journalist Jean-Tony Norté on the streets of Port-au-Prince in early February, the risks media face are ever present. But still, Haiti's reporters persist, knowing their audiences are depending on them. From Mathiado Villemé in Port-au-Prince, Sandra Lemaire, VOA News.
Organisations like the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press help journalists across the US perform their role as public watchdog. I spoke with Ganita Singh, a staff attorney for the RCFP here in Washington, to learn more about what they do and how they help.
We have been around for about 50 years, and we're essentially a one-stop shop for journalists where we provide pro bono legal support for virtually any legal need that a member of the news media may have.
And with those cases, what issues or challenges do journalists tend to come to you for help with?
We really see a wide spectrum in cases where dockets in court cases are sealed, or maybe some of the records filed in a court case are sealed. Journalists will come to us and say, I don't think this should be sealed, and it's actually really relevant for my reporting. Can you help me with this? So in those cases, we will file a motion to intervene in the case for the limited purpose of unsealing those records.
Why do you think that public watchdog journalism matters so much? What is it that attracts you to these cases?
For example, if you attend a government meeting, a school board meeting, say, or a city council meeting, and you're able to see government working as it should. You know, you're seeing the legislators or the school board representatives being engaged and curious. That fosters, I would say, a hope or rather a sense of faith and confidence in the way government is working. And just as important is being able to see misconduct and spot where potential failings and shortcomings are. So that watchdog role is of utmost importance, and it's what motivates Reporters Committee attorneys in providing pro bono support to members of the news media. So whether you're checking the score of the latest game, or you're checking the weather, or you're learning about the war in Ukraine or economic policy, the interest rates, whatever it is, we rely on members of the news media to distill these highly complex matters for us. And I feel like every time I try to imagine living in a society without a free press, I mean, it's a very dark and bleak landscape. The people are entitled to timely and accurate information about governmental affairs in order to make informed decisions about how they vote, who they want representing them. But just beyond that, I mean, being able to foster informed debate about matters of public concern is what democracy is all about. And that's why we need members of the news media to play that role in facilitating that.
Newsrooms are under extraordinary economic pressure. We see, particularly across the US, news deserts appearing, areas, communities that no longer have a local media outlet associated with their region, or very small newsrooms, maybe just 1 or 2 full-time staff. How prohibitive is it?
It's a very difficult landscape for local news right now, but fortunately individuals and organizations are taking note of that, and enterprises are springing up to kind of make things easier for local journalists. So local news is critically important, which is why the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press a few years ago launched its local legal initiative, where we now have attorneys staffed in 4 states presently. We're looking to expand that to at least 5. We have attorneys in Oklahoma and Tennessee and Colorado and Pennsylvania, where those attorneys are just, their dockets are filled to the brim, helping local journalists with freedom of information requests and court unsealing efforts. And the gains have been truly, truly remarkable.
When the system works well, and you've, I believe you were involved in the Khan v. Department of Defense records request for a journalist for the New York Times Magazine who was exploring the extent of civilian casualties from military strikes. Could you tell me a little bit about that case?
Absolutely. I love talking about this case, so I appreciate the question. Azmat Khan has sued the Department of Defense in a Freedom of Information Act litigation that my colleagues and I at the Reporters Committee are so proud to help Azmat Khan with. She focuses on America's air wars, and as you mentioned, she wants to understand the true extent of civilian casualties resulting from the war on terror. And in the course of her reporting, she learned that these drone strikes are very often based on deeply flawed intelligence, and they're executed in rushed and imprecise ways at times. And it's critically important that the American people have this more accurate and more honest picture of the ramifications of a war that has been waged in our names and with our taxpayer dollars for decades. And I think just as important as that element of allowing Americans to bear witness is the fact that Ms. Khan's reporting generated policy reform within the Defense Department. I guess the only advice that I would give journalists is to be persistent, because we need you and we need your doggedness and your bravery and your persistence in order to remain aware and informed.
For its January edition, the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo asked cartoonists to lampoon Iran's Islamist leader, Ali Khamenei. Iran's brutal response to anti-regime demonstrations has included sentencing protesters to death. In 2015, Charlie Hebdo was a target of a homicidal attack by Islamists who objected to cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Reacting to the latest cartoons, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman said, quote, "We are sorry that this magazine is published in a country which claims to be respecting the values and supporting the rights of others, but it fails to stand by the most obvious principles and bases that govern the international law. That is false." In fact, France's independent press demonstrates its adherence to international law. Freedom of expression is enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Charlie Hebdo's director, Riz Laurent Sorisol, said the cartoons of Khamenei are in support of Iranians, quote, risking their lives to defend their freedom against the theocracy. They also honor 12 colleagues assassinated in the attack on Hebdo's office in Paris. In Iran, hundreds of demonstrators allegedly have been killed by security forces, and thousands have been detained or arrested for covering the unrest. The UN Human Rights Chief has said death sentences for demonstrators amount to, quote, state-sanctioned killing for exercising basic rights.
Gender apartheid. That's how the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Afghanistan has described the Taliban policy of banning women from places in society, from schools to many occupations, including journalism. Azita Nazimi is one of those women. She's forced into exile but committed to keep reporting on issues affecting women still inside Afghanistan. VOA's Shaista Sadatlami tells us her story.
As a journalist who covered health and women's issues, and as a mother raising 4 children from exile in Pakistan, Azita Nazimi knows what news Afghan women find important. For 15 years, she reported for stations including Tolo TV, Yak TV, and Radio Begum. But when the Taliban entered Kabul in August of 2021, Nazimi and her female colleagues were told to go home. Nazimi remembers what was lost when the Taliban took over.
All our dreams and hopes, the achievements that women made in the past 20 years, and the main achievement of the Republic, having freedom of speech and press.
About 6 weeks after the fall of Kabul, Nazimi joined a group protesting the rules imposed on women.
We wanted to raise our voices to gain our freedoms, but on the contrary, no one listened to us. And our voices were silenced. That's why we left Afghanistan.
The Taliban takeover had dire consequences on Afghan media, says Rebecca Vincent of Reporters Without Borders, an international organization that advocates for press freedom.
The numbers of working journalists have decreased drastically for both sexes, but disproportionately so for women.
As of 2023, 11 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces have no female journalists at all. And of the 2,700 women reporters pre-Taliban, a little over 600 are still working, says Vincent.
Women are largely absent now, in not just in the storytelling role, but in the stories themselves. We've seen increasing restrictions by the Taliban on not only who can present the news and in what way, but who they're allowed to interview, who can be present on these broadcasts.
The shrinking space for female journalists mirrors that for Afghan women in general. Under Taliban rule, women are denied education and oftentimes employment, and are forbidden to travel unless accompanied by a close male relative. Local media in recent weeks reported that pharmacies had been told to stop providing access to contraceptives, a claim the Taliban rejected. For a journalist who used to report on women's health, Nazimi is frustrated.
If I could or I were allowed to, I would focus on women's issues, particularly health and women's empowerment, such as in social and economic sectors. Unfortunately, no journalist is allowed to work on such issues.
Afghanistan still has media, but Vincent says the ability of independent journalists to keep working is deteriorating. For Muska Safi in Islamabad and Lisa Bryant in Paris, Shaista Sadatlami, VOA News.
If a free press is the foundational part of democracy, then facts and fact-based reporting are the foundation of a free press. Training journalists to use fact-checking to dispel false information is the goal of the non-profit news organisation Dubara. Established in Nigeria, it's now a major resource for journalists across West Africa. From Abuja, our Timothy Obiezu dove into the media outlet's work with its editor, Kemi Busari.
The Nigerian Fact Checkers Coalition was established mid-2022, and it started with a meeting among Dubara, Fact Check Hub, and Africa Checks. So first of all, we realized that we all have a common enemy, which is false information. So disinformation is a very big issue in Nigeria because some people have found a market in it. So Nigeria is at a very critical stage currently. The country is not united in a way. There are a lot of other challenges like kidnapping, like we also have a lot of economic challenges like the debt servicing, the issue of the new naira and all. Because of these challenges, purveyors of false information are leveraging on people's sentiments, on people's biases to put out false information. So we get a lot of, like I said, we get a lot more these days, a lot more false information these days. And how do we fact check? Dubawa is an independent fact-checking organization that operates in 5 West African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Gambia. And what we do basically is we do fact-checking work. We try to, first of all, reach out to the claimants. For instance, if someone go on Twitter to claim something about the electoral process, we try to reach out to such person to say, okay, where is your source? How did you arrive at this? And after that, we also have a methodology that we follow. The attention span on the internet is very, very low. So we have FATCA that has just the claim, the verdicts, and how we arrive at the verdicts that you can read in less than 30 seconds. Information defines our lives in several ways. The kind of food we want to eat, where we want to go, how we want to get there, and what have you. And if we are fed with false information, sometimes it could lead to some fatal consequences. I'll give you an example of it. Some years ago, in the north central part of Nigeria, in Jos, a picture was shared on Facebook of some people from the Bedrock tribe attacking Fulani, of people from Fulani tribe attacking Bedrock tribe. And a few days later, some Fulani people were moving around a particular road, and they were accosted by some people from the Bedrock tribe, and they killed a family of 6. A retaliation just because of that picture. When fact checkers saw that picture, they fact checked it and they realized that it was from another country. So this information affects our lives in several ways, and that is why it's important for us to be very wary. And one of the key stakeholders are the journalists.
Among the 12 individuals that Time magazine is recognizing as Women of the Year for 2023 is Iranian activist and TV host Masih Alanjad. In exile from Iran since 2009, Alanjad hosts a weekly program on VOA Persian. She's been a fierce advocate for women's rights and outspoken about Tehran's requirement that women wear a hijab. While grateful for the recognition, Alanjad said that the circumstances blunt any enjoyment of it.
I really want to thank Time magazine for selecting me as one of the Women of the Year. But to be honest, I don't know whether I have to be happy or not because of the situation in Iran. In a normal circumstances for me as a woman who comes from a very tiny village in north of Iran to be selected for Women of the Year list of Time magazine should bring joy and happiness. But these days, these situations in Iran are not normal times for us. I want to use this opportunity to echo the voice of Iranian brave women who are leading one of the most progressive revolution, who are bravely saying that we lost everything, but not hope. So for me, this is an opportunity to dedicate my award to the brave women of Iran, to the brave men of Iran standing shoulder to shoulder with Iranian women and saying no to Islamic Republic.
There was an elaborate plot to kidnap and return Alanjad to Iran, but it was foiled in 2021, as was an apparent assassination attempt in 2022. That's all for now. Find our coverage of press freedom at voanews.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News, and catch up on our past episodes and explore new documentaries on our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm Jessica Jaree. But before we go, we're going to honour the work of those journalists who were killed this year or are still missing while trying to bring you the news.